Hi class, welcome to Phylum Mollusca. So these guys are all going to have soft bodies, but they are becoming more advanced than the other phyla that we've studied so far. We're going to do something a little bit different with the note taking. We're trying to save a little bit of paper and trying to give you some note taking skills that you will need at some point in your future lives. You should have this set of note sheets. Your notes will also have several diagrams that you'll be labeling as you go through the notes. So I won't make you draw any pictures for these, but you will have to label as we go on through the notes. Your sheets are general outlines. I'm going to encourage you to write less than you probably would want to, only because there's just certain information that you need, and you don't need every single little word. So I'm going to try and teach you. I'll go through the first part and tell you, okay, maybe this is what you should write, or you don't need to write this, or and give you little hints, and then I'll show you an example of what it could look like. So here's our slide showing our evolutionary development of organisms, and mollusks are going to be a little bit more advanced than platyhelminthes. That is something that you could write down from this slide, is that the mollusks are more evolutionarily advanced. They're more developed. They have a complete gut. So I would shorten that and just kind of put into words what you're seeing here, that they're more advanced than platyhelminthes. The new characteristic is a complete gut. This diagram is just showing you, I think we've seen this before, the distribution of species on our planet for the animals. And you can see arthropods, the green is, they're going to take over the world. And then mollusks aren't, I mean, there are not very many mollusks compared to arthropods, but there's quite a few. If you look at, some of the other ones, there's not very many of the other phyla. Chordata are all the vertebrates, the backboned animals, and that's the little black sliver. So where there's definitely not very many chordates, about half as many as there are mollusks. All right, so some characteristics. So now you can actually move into the next box on your note sheet. We're going to write down some characteristics. There are between 50,000 and 100,000 living species. I'm not going to ask you how many animals of mollusks there are on the planet. You don't have to write this number down. It's good to know. It's just a fun fact. There's about 35,000 extinct species. They can be small as a grain of sand, or as large as a school bus. You could just generalize and say can be very small or very large. One example, the largest that they've found on the planet is 1,000 pounds. And 80% of the mollusks, though, are less than 5 centimeters long, so they're not very big. And the ocean quahog can live to be 220 years old. That is not really something that you need to write down in your notes. That's just a fun fact you can bring up at the dinner table and surprise your parents with some strange factoid like that. All right, a few more characteristics. The term mollusk means soft-bodied. I would write that down. That's a good thing to remember. And their bodies in general, for all of their body shapes, are composed of 3 main parts. This will be important. So they have a head, a visceral mass. The viscera are where all the organs are. And within the visceral mass, there's something called a mantle. And this is a fleshy outgrowth of the body wall that covers the visceral mass. It kind of helps to protect. Sometimes the mantle will secrete a shell to help protect the organism's soft body. And then there's a ventral foot, ventral meaning belly again. if you remember way back to our directional terminology. This foot is used for movement, and it looks different in the different species, but just remember whenever they're talking about the foot, it doesn't necessarily have to be a terrestrial like a snail. It could be something like an octopus. So characteristics of mollusks, again, it kind of can go back up in your history section, the fact that they exhibit adaptive radiation. They have adapted to survive in many different types of environments, and that's sort of what this says here. So you could write that back up in your history section on your note sheet, and they've evolved to live in marine, freshwater, and terrestrial environments. They can live anywhere from the deepest ocean trenches to the tops of trees. So you can find them in a multitude of habitats on the planet. They do have bilateral symmetry. I would write that in your characteristic square. And most of them are unsegmented. They don't have segmented bodies. They have coeloms. This is one of our first eucoelomate organisms. So that's something important to write down as well. Just some vocabulary terms. Some of our mollusks are sessile and they stay in one place. Some of them are filter feeders and they strain food from water. If you know these terms very well, you don't need to write them down, but if you're kind of iffy on them, you may want to write them down. Marine refers to the fact that they live in salt water, and freshwater means ponds, lakes, rivers, streams. If you know the difference between them, you do not have to write these down. But if you're not sure what marine means, then you might want to scribble it on your note sheet. All right, so this is a generalized body structure for a mollusk. They obviously don't all look quite like this. An octopus and a squid look very different from this, but the inside of them has the same body parts. And you will be labeling soon, but you don't need to. I don't think I gave you this diagram exactly because this is very general and I want you to know more specific for the different species or the different classes at least. So here is a general body plan. You could flip to your diagrams and start to label some of these important parts. You're going to see this diagram a few times throughout the notes. All right, let's go through a couple of the body systems and then I'll show you what your note sheet should look like up to this point. So we will start with the skeletal system. They don't really have a bony skeleton. Some of them have the mantle that secretes a shell. If you think about a slug, they don't have a shell. An octopus doesn't have a shell. So they do have a mantle that helps protect their viscera, but they don't have a shell to protect them like a clam does. So instead, they have more or less a hydrostatic skeleton. That would be where they have a fluid-filled cavity to help give them support and movement capabilities. These are some things that you would want to write down in the skeletal system block of your note sheet. And then for their muscular system, they have a ventral muscular foot that they use for movement. And like I said before, it does look different in different organisms. They also have other muscles present that, for a clam, they have muscles that help them open and close their shell. There's a different muscular system in squid and octopus that help them move with all of their tentacles. And by the way, all of their tentacles are their foot, essentially. Okay, so the dorsal mantle covers a visceral mass, and it sometimes secretes the shell depending on the organism. So you can draw an arrow and label that layer the mantle, because the orange or the yellowish top part, that is the shell. So you're going to want to label the green layer on this diagram. It won't be colored in yours, but you should be able to tell the difference. This is the mantle. The shell is made by glands in the mantle that secrete calcium carbonate. So what I would do is wherever you have written about the mantle, maybe in your skeletal system, you could add that there are glands that secrete calcium carbonate, and then you can label your diagram as well. All right, a little bit more about the foot. It's generally adapted for various forms of locomotion, and you can add this into the muscular system block, that they could glide on a trail of mucus with their foot, like a snail or a slug. They can dig and anchor into sediment. The bivalves or clams and oysters can do this. Or the foot could form tentacles, like in the cephalopods, which are the octopus and the squid. So those are three things that you could write: gliding, digging, and tentacles down on your note sheet in the muscular system section. So here is what you might have as far as we've gotten with taking notes. You can see it's much more brief than what's in the slides, and it's just the very important information. These are the things that I would write down to try and help me remember what the important stuff is for this particular section of the notes. So if you want to pause it here and write down what I have, or just compare to what you've written down, now would be a good time to pause. Digestive system. They have a complete and complex digestive system. The mollusks feed on just about everything. Most of them are herbivores, carnivores, or filter feeders, but they pretty much eat anything and everything. Some of them are just like scavenger type as well. Like the detritus would be more or less the scavengers, and then some of them are parasitic. The carnivorous mollusks can drill holes through the shells of other animals using their radula, and we'll talk about their radula shortly. So all of this stuff you could just write complete complex digestive system in your block for digestive system. You could write herbivore, carnivore, filter feeder, eat detritus, and some are parasites. You know, you don't have to write every single solitary word. You can paraphrase and shorten on your note sheet. You can say the carnivores drill holes using their radula. And once they create a hole, they can extend their mouth and radula through it, through the hole that they've drilled in the shell, and rip apart the soft tissues of that animal and kind of eat it that way. It's kind of violent sounding, but that's how they do it. All right, so some of the mollusks are carnivorous, like the octopus and sea slugs, and they have an actual jaw with a beak-like structure that they use to tear their prey apart. When we dissect the squid, you'll be dissecting out that jaw, and it looks like a bird beak within them. And it's kind of cool to see that. But they're very strong with those. They have muscles around it that help them open and close it. Some of these mollusks can produce poison to kill their prey. You could be writing down, you know, just tidbits here and there from this slide that, you know, some have jaws with a beak, some produce poison. You could just be very short and sweet as far as what you're writing in the digestive system block. Some of these poisons are fatal to humans, so humans have to be very careful. And I believe I mentioned later, maybe it's in one of the videos that we'll watch, some of the species that are poisonous. Mollusks like clams, oysters, and scallops are filter feeders. They use feathery gills to strain food from the water. So you could say clams filter feed with gills, just to kind of shorten all these ideas into one little phrase on your notes. They pass water over their gills, and tiny plankton get caught in the sticky mucus. Then cilia, which are tiny hair-like structures on these gills, will help move this mixture of mucus and food into their mouth, and then they can digest it from there. They do have salivary glands. This is a new evolutionary advancement for organisms because they have a complete digestive system. They have a rasping tongue that we call their radula. So there's some enlarged images that you'll see. They kind of look like they have little razor blades on it. And the radula will have rows of miniature chitinous teeth. So the material that they're made out of is chitin, similar to what insect shells or exoskeletons are made of. Those are made of chitin as well. So here's a label for their digestive system. Make sure you're labeling your diagram. This is where the radula is located in their mouth. So their radula is a rasping tongue. Rasping just kind of means that they use it to scrape. The teeth are formed of chitin and can be replaced if they break or come off. And here, this is an electron microscope image of what they look like. Another diagram side view, just showing how it would look inside their mouth. So we've finished with digestive system. We're moving on to the excretory system. They do have something called nephridia to filter fluid from their coelom, so their body cavity inside of them. These nephridia will help control water levels and remove metabolic wastes. Undigested food is removed in the form of feces. Their cellular waste does have a lot of ammonia in it. And because ammonia is toxic, it has to be removed from the body. Remember, ammonia is the strongest form of nitrogen waste if you go way back to one of our first sets of notes. And mollusks will get rid of ammonia by using simple tube-shaped organs called nephridia, which remove it from the blood and release it to the outside. So for the excretory system, I would write down nephridia, remove ammonia from the blood. Very toxic. You could, make mention of that. And then I would definitely add that undigested food is removed in the form of feces. You don't want to get that confused with the excretory system. The feces is removed through the digestive system. You might want to label the coelom area is kind of around that red thing is going to be part of their circulatory system. And then you can see metanephridia. It's similar to the nephridia that are going to help remove the fluid. Moving on to our respiratory system, they have well-developed lungs or gills. So the ones that live on land, many times you'll find lungs in them. The aquatic ones will have gills. And the gills are used in respiration for breathing. The terrestrial mollusks breathe by using specially adapted mantle cavities that are lined with blood vessels. So if you see slugs and snails, and they always seem to be moist. They have to be moist in order to exchange gases. If they dry out, then they will die because they can't exchange gas. And that's essentially what this is telling you. So on your respiratory section, I would say have lungs or gills used in respiration. You could say that the terrestrial mollusks must have moisture to exchange gases between mantle and blood vessels. You could summarize it that way. And this is showing you they're not really gills, they're not really lungs, they're called ctenidium. The C is silent. This structure is used for respiration, and if you look at the generalized body plan here, it is located in its rear end. So they breathe through their butt, basically. All right, circulatory system. The oxygen that they take in travels in the blood to various parts of the mollusk. That's something that's kind of obvious, so you don't really have to write that down. The blood is pumped around with a simple heart, so you could make just a short note that they have a simple heart. Most mollusks have open circulatory systems. If you don't remember what that is, you may want to write a description. Open circulatory systems means they don't have blood vessels. The exception is the class of cephalopods, that would be your squid and octopus. And it's because if you think about the type of movement that they have, they need to have a more efficient circulatory system, and they will have a closed circulatory system. So open means that the blood is not contained within blood vessels, and it works its way into open spaces called sinuses. The dorsal heart is usually located in the pericardial cavity within their coelom. Squid and octopus have a closed circulatory system where the blood stays inside their blood vessels all the time. Now, pay attention, you will want to write down that they have a dorsal heart. If you think about the location of our heart is ventrally located. So theirs is a bit different as far as how their body plan is developed. And so for squid and octopus, I said before that it's a more efficient way to circulate blood. And then the question is, why do you think they need a closed circulatory system? So the coelom, again, is their body cavity. It's a different diagram here than you've looked at before, but it's the same location, providing, hydrostatic skeleton and more support, location for organs. In organisms with open circulation, the coelom contains circulatory fluid called hemocoel. Hemo means it's relating to their blood, and their blood is called hemolymph. Nervous system. They have a wide variety of nervous systems because some of them are more basic and some are more advanced. The simplest ones can include ganglia, ocelli, and statocysts. Ganglia are kind of rudimentary brain. Ocelli are kind of like eyes, and statocysts help them detect gravity. Some of them, these organisms have a nerve ring with pairs of ganglia, and then they'll have two pairs of nerve cords. One of the nerve cords will innervate the foot or control the foot, and the other will control the visceral mass. It kind of looks like a modified ventral ladder-like system. The more active mollusks like squid and octopus have a very developed nervous system. They have to be very coordinated. So for your nervous system section, you may want to write simple organisms, include ganglia, ocelli, and statocysts. If you want to include what those things do, that's probably a good idea, unless you really know what they do. You could say nerve ring with pairs, looks like a ladder, and then you could say very highly developed nervous system in squid and octopus. And interestingly, for the squid and octopus, they are capable of remembering and learning. And that's a very big advancement for the animal world because for the most part, the very basic animals don't have that capability. They don't have that type of nervous system function. So that's a pretty major thing for these organisms. Here you can label their paired ventral nerve cords. So if you think about where our nerve cord lies, it lies dorsally, and theirs is on their ventral side. So our hearts and our nervous system are kind of reversed. And then we have our reproductive system. There are various methods for reproduction in the different classes. They could be monoecious and dioecious. Remember, monoecious means they have both sexes in one, and dioecious means they have separate sexes. You may want to write those down and define them if you don't remember those meanings. Most mollusks have two separate sexes, and fertilization is external. The eggs and sperm are released into the open ocean and hopefully find each other. Results are free-swimming larvae, so the larvae swim around until they find a good place to live. In mollusks with tentacles, fertilization is actually internal, which is a newer evolutionary development as well. In octopus, the female dies after they have their babies. Some snails are hermaphroditic. They will get together and fertilize each other's eggs. So they don't self-fertilize, but they will swap sperm, essentially. And there you have some snail sex. This is what their larvae look like. You can see how their digestive system is a little strange looking. They have their mouth that kind of curves around to their anus, but they have little cilia on their outsides where that help them swim around. They all mollusks have a similar developmental pattern, so they all develop similarly like this with the trochophore larva. And the larvae float around in the water and feed on plankton. They have the same type as phylum Annelida, which are earthworms. We haven't gotten to that yet, but you will see very similar looking larvae in the annelids. Economics. There's some important things to make note of as far as economics go. Pearls are produced from oysters, and obviously they can be sold for money. There are things called burrowing shipworms that damage ships that are made of wood and other wood structures, so they deal with economics because they can cause damage. You have snails and slugs that can become garden pests and destroy food. Some people do eat snails for food. And definitely important, we remember from our platyhelminthes and nematodes that they can be intermediate hosts for parasites. So this takes us to the end of our first section of notes. We've basically covered general body structure, characteristics, and the different body systems or their general functions. The next set of notes will go over this specific classes of mollusks and talk about more in detail what each of the classes look like and how they're different from one another. What I will recommend you do is there's a couple video links that I've put in Schoology. You may want to go through and watch some of those to just make some of these ideas more concrete in your memories. So I will see you next time.